Okay, so today on another Absolutist Philosophy episode, let's try to get into some more concepts here. Basically, I could do this sort of thing forever, is my thought with this series. There's really nothing, there's no limit to it. It's just like, but it's reactive in nature, right? Because you're saying, like, society, it's like an every era thing. I could talk about the stigma effect. So what it means is that every era of human history, like every era of human history thought that it was right, and people in that era would have insisted upon it. And if you question them, and even like if you go back in time, and even if what you say is right, and you point out something that they would have issue with, they would still defend it and go along with it. So it's kind of like this tribalistic thing where you associate your identity with the trappings of the era. Because let me give you a good example, right? People will defend on sort of an initial basis, like without really thinking about it. They'll defend stuff and say, like, oh, it's for the greater good, it's for other people, it's for the collective, right? Like this humanistic fallacy. The problem is, like, what would be truly humanistic might be to tear down all of society, machination process, overextended technology, give up your conveniences, right? It's similar to this argument. Like, people will want reparations, let's say, for something, whatever it might be, right? Racial discrimination in the past and stuff. They want reparations for that. But if you truly want to give something back for atrocities committed in the past, then you would just leave, let's say, the U.S. and give it back to Native Americans. So I'm not saying what you should or shouldn't do. I'm just saying it's selective, right? You're saying, okay, reparations for one thing because you want something, but then you're not saying that original reparations because that doesn't benefit anybody. Like, people would have to sacrifice. So it's the same thing here. You want to act all humanistic, like, oh, being nice to each other socially, and oh, look at this guy being rude or something like that. You care about that on this superficial, basic level, but you won't sacrifice 2 meals a day to help somebody who's starving, or you won't sacrifice your luxuries and conveniences and alcohol and partying, and you won't sacrifice those things for human nature, right? And if you truly cared about human life, this is why the stimuli acme preservation is so important. That's why, that's what it is. The mass collective of people do not value human life. That is clear, right? They're nothing but hedonistic animals in that way, that they reproduce. It's the only way to explain it, because you can't, you can't really do it otherwise, because of the simple fact that there wouldn't be so many people, right? There's no plan. It's similar to what I say about, like, the universe or everything. Like, the fact of all the, random is even an egotistical kind of thing, because it assumes something, like some human-centric design, right? Like, oh, if it doesn't revolve around us, it's random, right? Was it random for dinosaurs to exist and for them to go extinct? Was it random for, what? How do you define random? How do you define lucky or unlucky? Like, random compared to what? Right, we have some expectation. How do you know what is random? Right, like, we want some design, so if it's not the way we want, then it's random. It's the same thing with luck. Like, oh, you got unlucky, or you got lucky, you hit the lottery, but everybody else who played, who didn't win it, got unlucky then. Like, so there's no such thing as luck. It's just a human-centric thing. Like, you're looking at it only from your point of view, right? Somebody was going to win, so there's no such thing as luck. Again, you're just kind of reducing the same event to your own perspective. So it's kind of like, it's just, a lot of things are, there's no real standard for that, like what that really means, because then, oh, everybody's getting unlucky all the time, and then somebody finally gets, something good happens, and then, oh, now they're lucky. It's the same fallacy like with God, where people, some tragedy happens and they pray to God, and then they survive it, and then they say, oh, thank God for getting me out of that tragedy. But you don't blame him for putting you in that tragedy, which means evidently you don't think he's all powerful, or you don't hold him accountable for the bad things. You only give him credit for the good things. So the other thing you need to understand, though, is basically the fact that basically, okay, every era will think it's right and kind of defend itself. But yeah, like lack of value for human life. So yeah, like, so well, even some of these words are a little bit loaded, but like the way in which the universe and life and everything came into existence would explain everything that could possibly happen. So if you said there's a God, you would have to explain away that supposedly doesn't want us to kill each other, etc., all the rule set of God. If you say God has no rule set, then it's basically just nature, and like, okay, some force out there, but it's kind of that we can't fully explain, but especially the origin of, but it doesn't have like a plan or agenda, or it doesn't revolve around us. If you want to say that, then it's basically like you're saying nature. But if you want to say God, then you'd have to explain away. Oh, God doesn't, like with an agenda, God doesn't want us to kill each other, but allows us to anyway, but created us with the capacity to do it, but allows us to do it constantly throughout all of human history. So like, you'd have to explain that constantly and be at odds with it. Whereas a more objective reality would not have that bias. It'd be, again, the arbitrary nature of the universe and existence, if you want to call it that. But again, that's our human-centric, egocentric point of view. But the kind of natural and arbitrary nature of how everything came to be would explain everything that could happen. So, it makes sense that people then would do bad things to each other because it's bad by our subjective standards, yes, but there's nothing more to it than that. So that's kind of the reality. Like, or what's a better example? Like all the random things, like, you could walk outside and get struck by a bolt of lightning. So is that God's design, and he really cares about people? And like, so that seemingly random element shows you that the universe doesn't revolve around us, so the way it came to be would be consistent with that. If you want to call it random, which again is loaded, but it just kind of is. It just is, right? It exists. Everything else that, we look at it from our perspective, but if you just look at it objectively, okay, the universe just is. It just came to be, as in there's no grand plan, no grand design, no God, no nothing like that. Then it would make sense. That's why children die, and that's why, disease happens and famine, and human history is rife with atrocity and slavery and all kind of things. Now it makes sense, because in other words, that's like what happens with animals. Like, they'll just do things. They'll kill each other. They'll do whatever. They'll, go extinct. Like, so there is no plan or grand design. Like, show me in all of that where the plan is. I don't see it. Right, and if you were to say that, then you would have to explain it. Like, you would have to say, what exactly is that plan, and how do you couch it to say that those things make sense within that context? So the other part of it is the fact that, kind of what I was saying, like, okay, the random or arbitrary nature of creation, or how everything came to be, would explain all the kind of random and arbitrary things that happen on a regular basis, because if you want to call them that, and if you want to use those words, because what that means is, otherwise there's a lot of things that you just wouldn't be able to explain. Right, we have this human-centric perspective, but like, things don't revolve around us, and people do bad things, and, it's kind of this weird argument that you sometimes hear people make, is like, morality is absolute, but then here are all the examples of people still doing immoral things anyway, and like, it doesn't stop it. So what good is it then if it's absolute? Like, okay, something's absolute, but you can still just go out and do it. So, okay. If that's your definition of the word absolute, then fine. Like that it's absolutely wrong or whatever. But no, to tie back into what I was saying, then the arbitrary nature of society and life, like how people treat it, also explains everything that happens. Like, why are we in the state we're currently in right now? It's just random. There's one good thing, like, people just keep having kids because they can't control their hedonistic inherent tendencies. So that's all that we have to account for the overextended state. But even if that was true, right? Even if that was true, even if that was true, like, the one positive is that, like, okay, there's so many people, so now out of 8 billion people, yeah, there's going to be some that do something exceptional or productive or whatever, but that's not the point. It's like you're creating this expectation, or you're creating this you're creating this expectation or some other standard that you're kind of injecting into things, and you're kind of saying, okay, everything revolves around people and blah blah blah, and you know, it kind of doesn't make sense, because right, it's not a question of whether it should, right? This is sometimes the fallacy that people have here. It's not a should statement, like, oh, so you're saying that you shouldn't be moral, and like they'll try to frame it that, like, Charlie Kirk, even, rest in peace, and other people did some of those things, right? Said some of these things, like, oh, morality, like they'll frame it like, oh, so can you say that some event that happened in World War II Germany that I won't even name is objectively wrong? And then they'll say, no, they can't say that, because again, they are a subjective person, so they wouldn't be able to say, you know, anything either way, right? If what they said mattered, then it wouldn't be objective anyway. But right, the fact that it's even a conversation, and you even have to address it, like, we don't have to debate whether we need oxygen or not, or we don't have to debate a lot of things like that. So what you understand is the simple fact that basically, right, the framing of, like, you're asking a subjective person, right? People are subjective, obviously. We're not gods, we're not omnipotent, we're not, you know, a force of nature, we have limits, right? We're physically constrained to our bodies, to our immediate environment, to our 5 senses, like, all those things limit us, and so that makes us at least potentially subjective. We can try to be objective, like what I'm trying to do right now, right, in a vacuum, but that doesn't make should statements then. It doesn't say what you should or shouldn't do, right? I'm observing the objective reality, and then you can decide for yourself. That's the difference, right? The problem with that is, to people, that, oh, what they end up deciding then wouldn't be very good, like, it'll be considered bad by society because it's too much freedom and too much choice, and they might not go along with it, and they wouldn't uniformly be controlled so easily. But just realize everything is a tool to control you, especially the gratification aspect. Like, you get gratification from different things, like social contrivance and this and that, but you get it only partially from half-mass practice, because that's like, you know, you won't sacrifice for amalgam theory, you won't give back the lands of natives, but you'll talk about reparations, or you'll talk about social gratification, but you don't really care. You don't really value human life. You do not. You're eating fast food and exuberant things and 3 meals a day and driving cars, and, like, again, I'm not to be aware of it is not to be above it. I'm not saying I'm better than that, but you don't value human life because, first of all, you preserve the stimuli acme flippantly. You'll have more children. You'll create more life before you fully value and address and save the life that you currently have on the planet. Number one, so that's a very self-insistent, egotistical, hedonistic thing to do. But number two is the simple fact that, you know, you're basically just look, the point is that you can be all egotistical about it or get gratification from it, but it'll be selective. You won't sacrifice unconditionally. You'll do some halfway thing to feel gratified, like, oh, you'll recycle one bottle so that you can feel good about yourself, and then go back to your entire lifestyle in a society that objectively is adverse to that same cause. Like, it's, you know what it is? It's like this, where I call the middle class is the real villain, because they're dumb and it requires their lack of action to allow atrocities and them paying their taxes and false absolute overextension. So it's kind of like they either are dumb or more so they play dumb. A good example is that scene from Seven Samurai that I mentioned before, like where they're asking the samurai for help, and then the samurai are asking for supplies or something, and then the villagers act like they have nothing and they're poor, but they have a hidden stash of stuff hidden away. So really what it means is, like, the middle class is selfish, and they're ruled and controlled by that, and that's what allows unqualified empirical authority to come to be, right? Because people are just selfish, and they'll be bribed, basically. You'll be bribed by bread and circuses and stuff like that. Right, so this, like, no true full value can exist in any capacity. But what it also means is that you're basically in a position to, or like, here's a good example, is like, people will value the subversive, but they'll question something critically thought about, or, you know, like what I'm doing now. People would maybe dismiss this, or label it, or not really care about it. Meanwhile, what they do value, which again, you would think would kill their credibility, what they do value is, like, okay, thought favoritism, escapism, entertainment, like kind of stupid things. That's what they actually value. That's what they're actually defined by. That's what they're controlled by. But again, they would take issue with the form, not the process. Like, oh, if you do it too directly or obviously, that's bad. But the same process done artificially, bypassing critical thinking, appealing to ego, emotion, dependent over extent of pretense, some incentive, that somehow then makes it okay. So the other aspect is the fact that basically you basically have to understand the fact that yeah, whatever. The whole principle of these discussions is like, okay, logical razors and objective observation, and then you can decide for yourself from there. But the problem is people don't often do that. They just don't think